it to meet the need of something to try to fix the problem. And my argument to you is that that's not necessarily working. It's helping, but it's not fixing the main problem. So what's the main problem? Kind of go back to old school relationships, old school connection. Why do I call it old school? So the irony, we call social media, which there's all kinds of great things about social media, okay? Great things. I think lives have been saved because of social media. And guess what it's doing? Disconnecting. Isolating. You know what I'm finding about anybody being a counselor person? Doesn't matter what your age is. People want to be seen, heard, and understood. That's why social media is so popular in one sense. But in another sense, you can't connect with people in an authentic, real, transparent way via what we have in social media. That really only happens, and I say old school, it's back to old school relationships. Actually talking. Actually empathizing with another person. They want authentic, real relationship. This quote I'm going to give you right here is actually from a little TED Talk that I saw from a young 20s millennial girl. She had a talk about her first year in college, about how she felt so isolated, disconnected from people, even though she was in the midst of people, and the lack of hope that she had. And she has this talk about how she went on this journey, basically, in which she experimented removing the small talk and getting to the point. And her whole point was about connecting in authentic, real relationships with people. And then how much that helped her. Well, she gave this little quote from this show. The only thing keeping you from being happy is the belief that you are alone. The common denominator with people who are struggling with suicide, another common denominator, if you can have more,
isolated.
They feel like they're alone. Doesn't matter how much you guys can say, hey, but you're married, or you have kids, or you have a great family, or look at this group you're a part of. Their perception is that they are alone. Now I'll talk a little bit about ASSIST. I'm a fan of Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. It's from Living Works that I'll talk about here in just a minute. But they talk about this idea of when a person is, when you're trying to connect with a person in their struggle with suicide, they are in this certain category of they believe they're alone, they're only focused on the past, and they're focused on death, because death is what they believe is going to give them relief. Okay, so the only thing that's keeping you from being happy is the belief that you are alone. Try to think about that quote even in your own struggle with dissatisfaction and unhappiness in your life. I will guarantee you it has something related to relationships and connection in your own life. Okay, another quote here from a psychologist. Connection is why we're here. This is a secular psychologist, not religious. Connection is why we're here. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. Neurobiologically, that's how we're wired, it's how we're here. It's this whole idea of connection. It's what provides real meaning or contributes to real meaning. So I throw up this verse from the Apostle Paul. This is found in Galatians chapter 6, for those of you that know anything about the Bible. And he says this: bear one another's burdens, and in so doing, you will fulfill the law of Christ. The law of Christ being the golden rule, love one another. And he talks about this idea of striving with one another, bearing one another's burdens. And in the Greek language that he uses there, it's this idea of, carrying, bearing this burden, this big thing. And the presupposition is, we're all bearing burdens. And we all need help bearing that burden. And this is within the context of this letter that he's writing to friends of his. He's talking about the concept of selfless love and serving one another. in this idea of bearing one another's burdens. There's another verse that talks about in James, and I'm not a Catholic, I'm a Protestant Christian, and I had a hard time understanding the whole priest kind of confession, the confessing of sins, absolve. I didn't believe that I could absolve anybody of their sins. James writes, confess your sins each to each other. So he talked about, hey, everybody confess your sins to each other. Not necessarily in a priest, but in kind of a friend idea. Like this same concept, bear one another's burdens, confess your sins to one another, and then he talks about the healing that takes place as a result of that. I think about that from a practical perspective. Guess what most people don't talk about? Their problems. You could say their sins. The stuff that they struggle with, the stuff that they wrestle with, the moral injury stuff, the stuff that they're injured by emotionally, in their heart, in their head, they're struggling with morally. Guess what we don't reveal to people? And so this concept of real connection is actually connecting with another person in a real authentic way. Look, I'm not going to talk about my stuff with somebody that I don't actually trust, and I don't actually think care. I'm going to reveal that stuff to somebody that I think really cares, and really is going to listen in a non-judgmental way. Another quote for you here. Oh, I say this, but I'm not a professional. You're asking me to be a counselor. I'm not. I'm actually asking something else. There's some interesting research that I came across with a friend of mine. This quote, the results of a recent study that compared the effectiveness of professional helpers to paraprofessionals. Okay, this had to do with a faith-based kind of a counseling book. So it's lay people helpers. You guys know what I mean by lay people?
General anybody?
Generally anybody, okay? Volunteer people. People that are helping other people. And look at these quotes. Here's one. Clients of lay helpers consistently achieved more positive outcomes than did clients of the professionally educated and experienced counselors. The studies demonstrated that maturity, love, genuine concern, empathy, humility, and vulnerability were more important than professional training. And why do you think that is? Or do you have any idea?
They can relate with you and what you're saying.
Okay? They can relate with you and what you're saying.
You're not getting paid.
They're not getting paid. So why do you say that?
Because
Because
they don't have to be there.
they don't have to be there?
But they're there when they want to be there.
Okay.
Because the psychiatrist is seeing, you're thinking that you have a medical problem. When you do, it's hard to admit that. So you can't really, it's hard to open up. Whereas if you're talking to somebody that's not being paid, that hasn't had that background, you feel like you can open up and not be judged by what someone's already been counseled, how counselors are trained and stuff.
Okay?
And I think another thing is that in a lot of cases, you don't want an answer. You don't want that professional to tell you what's wrong with you. Yes, I diagnosed you and you have this, this, and this. You want somebody to listen to what you're saying. And you want somebody to hear what you're saying. And you don't necessarily want to be cured or anything else. You just want people to hear you.
Okay, so what you just described is this concept of just connection.
Yeah.
Is there any really real quick fix to a person suffering with some kind of emotional issue or trauma? I'm going to show you another, I'll save it here in a second. Have people been helped by professional people?
Sure.
Yeah, so I don't want to demean the idea or concept of professionals. They're needed and they can be very, very helpful. But what you guys are saying can be aspects of kind of what is happening relationally between a person who is at risk or needing or wanting help and they're in front of a professional. There's something else that can happen. I think you brought up the idea of, well, you're paid to be here. So there can be doubt even in a person that says, you don't really care. You're being paid to do this. And there's a tendency for a paid person to put somebody's problem into a formula, like a doctor. It's a formula. It's a quick fix. It's a box. Biased. You talk about judged. Okay, I'm being paid to try to figure out your issue, and here's your issue. I'm making a determination. And again, that can be both helpful or not, within this stuff that we're talking about regarding emotional, moral injury, emotional suffering, and I guess I'll read this whole thing. Again, this is from a psychologist. I have always found that responsible neophyte or beginner therapists who convey their sense of curiosity and enthusiasm often form excellent therapeutic relationships and can be as effective as a seasoned professional. He emphasizes this. It's the relationship that heals. He says it 3 times. It's the relationship that heals. He says it's my professional rosary. I say that often to students and say other things as well about the way to relate to a patient. Positive, unconditional regard, non-judgmental acceptance, authentic engagement, empathic understanding. Guess what you have to offer a person as a volunteer, as a lay person, as a counselor? What's that? Your ear. There's all kinds of research that you guys can look up that says the pathway to healing in counseling is just this concept of connection, this concept of relationship. When the person at risk really believes that somebody cares and wants to hear their story, there's a connection that takes place that is healing in and of itself. It may not take care of all of their issues, but it is the connection, it is the relationship, like this guy says, it's the relationship that heals. Now, I'm biased as a religious guy, because this is what I believe is absolutely the case in any and all problems, really, as far as it relates to people. In the church realm, I often talk about how it's a relational problem, and so therefore it's a relational solution. My presupposition as a counselor is the same thing. It's a connection issue, so therefore it's a connection problem, so therefore it's a connection issue. Yes, sir.
Yeah, sometimes it's just as simple as, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee. Let's go have a beer. You just sit down and talk.
And so I'm going to transition with that. Perfect transition. I wish I could say that you and I planned that. So how do we fix it? Suicide intervention. As it relates to this idea of worldview, understanding where people are coming from, understanding this new generation of kids, of young adults that have a very different viewpoint perhaps than you do. That can be hard to understand. How do we fix it? So this idea, and I'm pulling this mainly from my training and experience with ASSIST, Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. Just to give you a plug, it's a 2-day training. We do it in the Guard. It's what we do. We train our regular people. We train what we call our gatekeepers. Gatekeepers being military personnel that are there, that have interaction with people like medics, military police, frontline leaders, your platoon, squad leaders, platoon sergeants, those kind of folks, and anybody else. Lay people, we train this. It's a 2-day training, okay, called Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. We being the National Guard, we're out there throughout the state in all of our communities. So you folks that are VSOs or associated with the WDVA, as you are, we gladly invite you to our classes that we have. So I'll have my contact information up. You guys can reach out to me, and I can send you the class schedule that we have. Or if you ever want me to come out and talk to your folks about this, or even do the training, I'd love to talk to you about it. But it's Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. So I'm going to throw all this up. We take people through what's called the Pathway for Assisting Life. It's the PAL model. I talk about not having a formula, but then I give you a formula, right, for suicide intervention. And I'm not training you right now. What I'm appealing to you is what this gentleman said right here. Connection, real relationship, even if it's only for 20 minutes. ASSIST approaches suicide intervention from the standpoint of the concept of first aid. So most everybody that's ever been in the military, that is in the military, understands the main point of first aid. Anybody know what it is? keep them alive. So what I'm going to do, if I see somebody on the street today as I leave this place, if I see somebody laying on the street, I'm trying to assess the situation to see what it is that is their main problem and trying to apply some kind of technique in order to keep them alive. In order to keep them alive just for even a few more minutes until somebody else can come along and continue the process. All right? So first aid, I'm trying to prioritize what's the main problem that's wrong here. And with suicide first aid, the main problem when we're talking about people and suicide, what am I trying to determine about a person that I may be in contact with just in a 5-minute conversation?
Are you planning to commit suicide?
Is suicide the issue?
Yeah.
Is this person's life at risk because they're struggling with suicide? Okay? And the training goes through this whole idea of, I talk about spidey senses and invitate, the fact that, hey, you guys have all been there, I'm sure, to where you're face to face with a person and they're struggling, and you can tell they're struggling, but as you end up talking to them and connecting with them, you're realizing, hey, wait, this may be a little deeper than hey, just that they're struggling, I say just with a broken marriage or a death of a loved one or lack of employment, regular stuff, regular life stuff, but yet there's something else going on here that they're struggling with. The spidey senses go off. I'm wanting to know if suicide is this person's issue. And what assist training has done for me, and I think so many other people, it has gotten people comfortable with this concept right here. Being able to ask somebody about suicide. There's that whole myth out there that says, hey, if I ask somebody about suicide and they haven't brought it up, then I'm planting some kind of seed in their head. That's a myth. That's not true.
Probably going to have to be that.
What's that?
Be a denial then, if you bring it up. It's going to be denial if you're not talking about it. So.
Sure. There's something that really healing, that the big word cathartic that goes on here that I found when I'm talking with a person. And I'm starting to go, wait a minute, this struggle seems pretty hurtful, pretty deep. And I ask the person about suicide. Something happens, for me, almost overwhelming. When I ask somebody else, think about it first. Now, in a room this size, there are people in here that have thought about suicide, that may have even attempted. Think about the wrestling match that a person goes through when they start to think about suicide. It's not like a normal, everyday decision that you go, I'm going to go to the park, or I'm going to go on a hike. I'm going to do something that just doesn't take necessarily a whole lot of thinking to decide what you're going to do. Most people, even if they're not religious, still have a problem with suicide. And why is that?
There's always been a stigma attached to it.
Not that.
Most people are really still scared about whatever is next. Death is still a giant deal regarding of what your belief system is. I've had people say, hey, I ask them, well, why haven't you committed suicide yet? Here's a long story before that. Okay, but because they've just told me a story that is terrible, and there's no hope, and there's never going to be any hope, and all that whole thing. So then I eventually asked them, well, what has stopped you? Why haven't you committed suicide? And it's, look, I'm scared to death of what the next thing is, whatever that is. I'm trying to resolve that, okay? Guys, the thought of suicide is for most people, is an extreme wrestling match internally. It's a conversation, it's an argument, it's a debate, and guess who that debate is with? Yourself. All by their lonesome. Most people think that they're crazy. Most people think that nobody's going to understand. They're scared to reveal that, to be vulnerable in that way. Therefore, they're increasingly isolated. They're increasingly alone. You guys know what that's like, carrying on a debate with yourself in your head. Whether that's anxiety, fear, depression. How often have you had that kind of debate going on in your head? I'm not talking about suicide. Let's just talk about normal stuff. You just laughed, I won't ask you, you know, what you're laughing about, but you,
I was just having a conversation with myself.
so you think about those conversations and how often, especially as it had to do with like a decision, okay? Or maybe a relational difficulty with somebody, and you were actually able to sit across from another person that you think actually is listening to you, that you can trust, that it is maybe empathizing with you, and you say those words, that part of that debate out loud. How often has your issue been clarified just by being able to say that stuff out loud? Happens to me all the time because I'm a counselor, okay? So I'm sitting there, I'm not doing any magic at all. I'm just letting people talk out loud and they're going, holy cow, did I just say that out loud? That's stupid! Now, I'm not saying that it's stupid to consider suicide, but I'm just talking about the clarification that somebody can have by being able to have a conversation out loud with another person. Especially when it's with suicide. Guys, you know how long somebody can wrestle with this debate, this wrestling match by themselves? Who said it? Years. Years. By themselves. And when I'm actually sitting across from somebody and I'm thinking, I think this is a pretty serious issue, and I'm able to say, man, if I was going through the same thing that you're going through, and I had the same lack of hope that you have, I'd really be struggling. And I may even be thinking of suicide. Is that what you're struggling with? You know what typically happens if the person really is struggling with suicide? You know what typically happens? There is a relief. There's a relief like you wouldn't believe. And why do you think that is?
So I can finally tell somebody.
They can finally tell somebody. Guys, they're scared to death to tell somebody. They're scared of judgment. They're scared of condemnation.